Hi, I'm Bill Crystal. Welcome to Conversations. I'm very glad to be joined again by Harvey Mansfield, the Harvard professor, the original converser or conversationalist or whatever the proper term is here. But it's great to have you back and great to be discussing Machiavelli, whom you've worked on for a long time, translated several of the major works, and author.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Well, good to have you. And author of an earlier volume from 1996, Machiavelli's Virtue, and now of a forthcoming volume of articles, Machiavelli's Effectual Truth. At least that's what you're intending to call it. It's your title, right? Okay. And of which there's a new introduction, which we'll focus on perhaps today, which is really terrific and important, I think, and then a very long essay, which could be a short book on Machiavelli and Montesquieu, which we could also, maybe we can touch on that too.
Touch on that.
That would be great. So it's really great to have you back, first of all, and great to have you here, our leading interpreter of Machiavelli, one of the two great modern interpreters of Machiavelli. It's okay to put Leo Strauss in the same elevate him to the same category.
No, that's a great elevation for me.
Okay, well. So let's talk about
an undeserved elevation. Let me say a word for Leo Strauss and his thoughts on Machiavelli, his famous game-changing book of 1958. He changed his opinion about Machiavelli as well, as I think is well known. An earlier book in the late 30s on the political philosophy of Hobbes, he said that Hobbes was the founder of modernity. And in this book, he changed his mind and said, no, it wasn't Hobbes, it was Machiavelli. He had not paid sufficient attention to the forces that prevented Machiavelli from being as explicit as Hobbes was. And that was the reason that he gave for his mistake, as he said. And in his Hobbes book, he claimed, he made an argument, still powerful, and read by most of the scholars on Hobbes, and believed by some of them that Hobbes is more of a moralist than a scientist. And that what is really fundamental about him was the new morality that he brought of equal rights and materialism. And that his science was an instrument of that morality rather than the other way around. So that could lead you to Machiavelli, because Machiavelli also makes his announcement of his change in chapter 15 of The Prince, departing from the orders of others, he says, in regard to morality. Saying what others focused on the good. What is the good, or how good are you? And the trouble with doing that, he says, is that you're relying on something that's imaginary, and not something that's the effectual truth. If you rely on the good, you're wishing that other people will be good back to you. But if this doesn't happen, then you are nonplussed and at a loss, and you will come to ruin. He actually says that, uses that lovely phrase, come to ruin. So he too begins modernity, you would say, departing from the orders of others. That's the orders of the ancients and of the medieval philosophers who were derivative of the ancients. In regard to morality, that's how modernity begins. It's not a change in science,
right,
strictly, or it's not Galileo, it's not the earth moving instead of sitting still as it seems to. So,
but the effectual truth we should talk about for a minute. That's so you stress that, of course, you put it in the title. But I have one other question, though. I mean, so I take it Strauss probably also didn't quite appreciate in the 30s what he came to emphasize, that Machiavelli was fully a philosopher, had thought all these things through. He wasn't just a extremely intelligent, hard-headed political realist. And that must have been key also to Strauss's.
Yes,
At least everyone knew Hobbes, Bacon,
yeah.
Descartes. They were all.
But he began to see that pretty quickly. And,
Once he,
yes, I
with
think
his-
so. And so that, yes, it is a question of Machiavelli. I mean, what I'm talking about is Machiavelli is the founder of modernity. And that means that Machiavelli was a philosopher.
Right. Those two go together.
And that a philosopher can be a founder.
Yeah.
And then modernity is something which was founded according to somebody's plan, and not just a result of accidental causes that came together, as most historians, I think, would say.
And that's for me what was so exciting about that long introduction, which is, you've said it before, argued it before, and Strauss, of course, does, but I think you really develop what it means to have been the founder of modernity and a philosophic founder of modernity,
Yes.
more perhaps than you have before, and more.
Yeah.
Elaborate on that more.
Yes, I go a little bit further than Strauss
Yeah.
in this regard. So, and that's that's risky. But
in a direction he pointed toward.
but he was so strong, had such a powerful mind himself that he didn't feel that he had to say everything, and he generously left many items in his book, Thoughts on Machiavelli, to be explored and elaborated, and perhaps got wrong by later followers of his, as I am.
Good.
So
So
that's what I'm doing in this, in what comes. Now let's look again at the effectual truth.
yeah.
This is a phrase in the first paragraph of chapter 15 of The Prince. It says, "The effectual truth instead of the imagination of a thing." You look at this phrase, effectual truth seems to have no forerunner. I haven't been able to find it anywhere in any philosopher, that particular phrase.
Wow.
And the particular word, effectual, was invented apparently by Machiavelli, one of the Italian scholars who worked on the text of The Prince. Just happens to mention this rather amazing fact that this word, which we use quite frequently, came into the English language soon after Machiavelli, and actually got into the King James Bible, if you can believe that. Which,
Machiavelli would have liked that.
He would have loved that, yeah, which came out in 1611, so maybe 100 years later. So that's effectual is and this is the only use of it in the whole Italian Renaissance.
So the phrase in Italian is
verità effettuale, and then
used only by Machiavelli.
Only
apparently.
by Machiavelli, and only this once.
Yeah, that's really amazing.
See, not in a letter, no other, and not in the rest of The Prince. He doesn't ever explain it. See,
Used in this extremely famous and important chapter of The Prince.
Yes, it is.
In a central way, you might say.
Right. And he never used it again. A word to the wise is sufficient. It's a good example of that.
Uh-huh.
And a single word like that, used just this once, calls attention to itself. If you're the type of person who doesn't need to be told things twice.
Right.
So what is it?
The solitary use of it makes it more important, not less important.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. That's what I'm suggesting. So now, so what I'm interested in now is in the philosophical meaning of the effectual truth. The moral meaning is sort of to deprecate, or to downplay, or to satirize even the moral attitude, as when you tell someone, "I love you." What does it really mean? The effectual truth is, I want something from you. So that's, in other words, what is the result that comes out of your high-sounding words? So the focus is on the result, and you could see how this connects to modern science. Its abandonment of formal cause and final cause, as Aristotle had it, to the efficient cause, the cause that makes or produces, and the cause that has an effect. So, and other aspects of modern science, its materialism, its use of the extreme case, its abandonment of normal. There isn't any normal. What we call normal is just what is more frequent than some other event. And there's no norm that, as in Aristotle's Ethics, you might say. So aspects like that, which we talked about earlier.
Yeah, we talked in an earlier
conversation. I perhaps don't need to go over that.
But it undermines the morality of intention, right? Because consequences matter. You don't get credit for.
You don't get credit for intention,
wishing.
much less goodwill.
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty foolish to go around spouting or actually believing in people's goodwill.
Right.
So then.
Why is this so fundamental, and why is it the foundation of modernity? I guess. Yeah.
Right. So then well, let's have a look at what it means for a philosopher to run a country. Because this can explain a little bit more the sense of founding that a philosopher undertakes. And that I found just recently in chapter 11 of The Prince, and I'll read it to you from someone's translation, which
this is needless to say. This is needless to say from the authoritative, definitive, unsurpassed Mansfield translation.
All right. Chapter 11 is called of Ecclesiastical Principalities, and he starts off with this very sarcastic description of ecclesiastical principalities, that is, countries that are run by the church. That is pretty much all countries in his time. He said, these alone have states and do not defend them. They have subjects and do not govern them. And the states, though undefended, are not taken from them. The subjects, though ungoverned, do not care, and they neither think of becoming estranged from such princes, nor can they. So then it just occurred to me that this is a beautiful description of how a philosopher rules a society. How America, say, is ruled by John Locke and Montesquieu, perhaps, with some others too. But nobody knows that. Right. Nobody would think of complaining or being estranged from John Locke. And it's there. It's fundamentally there everywhere, but it's not understood or appreciated. And there we all are.
It doesn't feel oppressive. You don't feel like you can rebel. You can't or should rebel against it, I guess.
No, you don't even know what it is. What there is to rebel against,
right?
Or what you're thinking about. So that's what he set out to achieve, I think, and he became very. That took him to the question of succession, which is very important for Machiavelli's Prince. In the Prince, he seems to indicate that the only way really for a prince to have his regime be succeeded after he dies is to transform it into a kind of republic. Because if he's succeeded by another prince, then that prince will do his best to efface any memory of the preceding prince as a kind of rival or threat to him. And so the only way is to become a founder of a republic, like George Washington is our first president. So he's the others can be president, but they're not the first. So he's still ahead of us all. And on the other hand, he's not a tyrant, and we can revere him as the first of his kind. And so that's a suggestion that a philosopher, even if he wants to be by himself, because for Machiavelli, every prince, indeed every human being, if you understand your situation, needs to consider himself and to make himself what he calls uno solo, one alone, in which you do not depend on other people, but they depend on you. Yeah. So that's what you try to achieve. Now, Machiavelli as philosopher can't quite do that fully because he's going to die and others will come. How is he going to control and make possible a continuing conspiracy to change the world so as to cure it from imaginary thinking, imaginary moral thinking? So that's his problem, you might say, a succession problem. He wrote a play called Mandragola.
Discussed in one chapter of the
Discussed in
forthcoming book.
Yeah.
It's an article that's already published. Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in Mandragola, the leading theme is a young man, Callimaco, who falls in love with a beautiful woman who's married and who is moral. A very Christian woman. And so his problem, since he wants to conquer her and possess her, is how to do this. And he sets up a conspiracy. So it's a play about a conspiracy, but that conspiracy is made possible by the fact that the wife's husband, the stupidest man in the play, is also a kind of doctor of letters, refers to a philosopher, the only one in the play, and I think is kind of a representation of Machiavelli himself, who pretends to be dumber than he is. And he wants a son. So it's a play which is a conspiracy about getting a son. And what they do is use the young man, the Callimaco, as a kind of stud for his wife, who commits adultery, but has this good result therefrom.
But the young man thinks he's overcoming the foolish
right.
old man.
But actually, his way is being facilitated,
and he's used by the.
And he's being used, So that's the way Machiavelli gets control of you. He makes you think that you control yourself, and you're imitating him by doing what he does, but you're actually a kind of instrument in this grand campaign or conspiracy to change the way human beings everywhere live and what they think. So, and this is why conspiracy is such an important feature of his thought. Many scholars underestimate conspiracy, but they just take a outward resemblance or fact that in both the Prince and the Discourses on Livy, his two main works. The chapter on conspiracy is the longest chapter. Chapter 19 in the Prince, and Book 3, Chapter 6 in the Discourses. So look it up. And there you see that he gives you directions on how to carry one out, how to carry out such a conspiracy. And so that's what he's attempting with his succession.
And how much of this has he learned from Christianity? Or, I mean, he's, of course, overturning.
Yes, well, that's right. So he's, it's a project. The Italian word is impresa, and which it sounds like the word project, which is kind of Vorstellung in German and English. And enterprise is another translation for impresa, or campaign in a military sense, and enterprise in the sense of sort of free enterprise that we use today. Something you do on your own, use your freedom to do, which brings you satisfaction or even glory, honor, plus money, material gain, and perhaps prestige over, or even governance over other human beings. So that's an important word. La mia impresa, my enterprise, is a phrase he uses.
About his own.
About himself.
Yeah, that's striking.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Right. So after him, there's going to be other philosophers, and there will be followers and readers. So he compares himself to the head of an army, but it's an army of spiritual warriors, say, not of actual dressed up military. And who else did that? Say, and he speaks of how unarmed prophets always fail, so you need to have an army. And he gives as an example of a failed prophet, Savonarola, who sure enough was killed and burned at the stake before Machiavelli's eyes in downtown Florence in 1498. But he says, an unarmed prophet always comes to grief. That ain't true. Yeah. When you read Machiavelli, you have to prepare yourself for the fact, see, the sad fact that he lies. He has a letter in which he says he lies. And he's gotten so used to it that he hardly knows when he's telling the truth and when he's lying. And he adds so that he's an expert. He's a doctor in the art of lying. So there is an obvious unarmed prophet who didn't come to grief but conquered the world in the sense pretty much that Machiavelli means for himself, and that's Jesus Christ. Quite a pretty obvious candidate. And he did it through a church. So Machiavelli's going to sort of co-opt the Christian church, imitate it, but turn it over. And instead of putting God at the top, put a man, a human being, at the top. He's going to maintain the Christian Trinity, but he refocuses it as an army with three branches, which he discusses in the Discourses. And then I talked about this in my earlier book on the Discourses called Machiavelli's New Modes and Orders. Right. The three branches of the modern army: infantry, artillery, and cavalry.
Yeah, what are those supposed to suggest?
They represent these. The infantry represents stubbornness, ostinazione, then obstinacy, and that's a spirit of of Machiavelli's honor. He gets the orneriness, the resistance, the intractability of human beings. And artillery, that means you can hit somebody from a distance. That's like propaganda, or the bringing of the message to human beings, the word to human beings. And then cavalry is man on a horse. He's up there where I'm not. I'm just walking. So that's authority, somebody who's above you and looks down upon you. So you've got, those are the three parts, that is Father, Son, rather Holy Ghost, Son, and Father. So he's taken the Trinity and turned it upside down. And said, putting the Spirit, Holy Ghost, first, and the Father as authority comes last. So that's what he's doing in general to Christianity. He's turning it upside down. And he's going to use this, especially the central one, the artillery, that is propaganda. Strauss had spoken a couple of times of Christian propaganda as a model for Machiavelli, and in his book Thoughts on Machiavelli. So,
and this is in the service of humanity.
And this army also has captains. That comes out in Book 3 of the Discourses. The captains, said Machiavelli. These are captains of his, but also they are captains over others. So those, one can imagine, are the successor philosophers, because they're going to be, and there were, modern philosophers who are Machiavellian in their spirit. They follow out the notion of effectual truth. Descartes, Hobbes, Locke, Bacon, Spinoza, Leibniz. There's quite a list.
And knowingly carrying out
Machiavelli's
project, you
now
believe?
That I'm leaving to others.
Bacon seems to be very...
Yeah, Bacon is pretty obvious, because he refers actually to one of the doctors of Italy,
right.
i.e. Old Nick. So that's much clearer than the others who stop mentioning him. Hobbes never mentions him. Locke, of course, never mentions him. But you could probably find indications of it, and I leave this urgent message to future scholars, or present ones.
Yeah, since not
to work on this, to work on this a little bit more.
Yeah, not mentioning cuts both ways, right? I mean, you might not realize quite your indebtedness, or you might wish not to advertise the fact that you're following.
Yes, of course.
Notorious character.
Right.
Yeah.
No, so Machiavelli, in attacking morality, knew that he wasn't going to succeed in changing morality or getting people to abandon it, because moral people work under the same necessity as the rest of us. They're weak. They have to believe that people are good, because otherwise they're in trouble. Right. If people are not good, they're weak, and that's it for them. So they have to believe in a God that will protect them or save them, or at least provide consolation in the next world, if not in this world. So that's their necessity. So human beings are going to be moral as long as human beings exist, as they are, capable of being not good. There'll be people who want to identify that and oppose it. And so Machiavelli would not therefore be surprised to hear that his name is used for something bad, or is used for any dishonorable act, as you can call it, Machiavellian. And that's...
He sort of gives permission.
Yes, that's right. So that's what he's done for us, and I think he's joking. He's laughing to himself at the bad name that he's going to get, his form of glory.
Right.
Yeah, because glory is the only only high good or highest good that human beings can achieve. And the highest glory is the glory that occurs after you die. So you get to appreciate that future people. Future people will admire your name, and or if not do what you want. See, but he doesn't care about having people admire. Most people admire his name. All he wants are the people, who very few, who understand, the other philosophers who will come and who will carry on this impresa to its success. I don't know whether that takes us now to Montesquieu.
Yeah. So I mean, just one word before we get to it. So he expects, as it were, that these subsequent philosophers, I mean, given that he understands morality is not going away, that does seem very important. I mean, the new modes and orders don't transform human nature.
Yes.
They accept human nature and the necessities.
Okay, now that's one place where Hobbes tried to change his view. Hobbes does try to produce a new morality, a morality of rights,
right,
and duties which are connected to rights, a duty to be accommodating, and in other words, and to be honest in a kind of low way. So honesty comes back in.
That's in accord with Machiavelli's notion that people will want to be moral, want to think they're being moral, and therefore would want some form of moral justification. If it's a Hobbesian one instead of a Christian one, that's Right.
And it does away with the eminence of morality that was so prominent in the ancients and also in the Christians. The nobility of it
makes it equal, right?
Yeah, it's the morality of all equal. So not very demanding. Right.
So the Hobbes-Locke modification is in the spirit of
Machiavelli, but it is a change, and it shows that now Machiavelli wouldn't be surprised by the need to change, and because he himself describes it in a chapter in the Discourses, Book 2, Chapter 33, where he speaks of Fabius, the Roman general. Fabius was sent on an expedition with explicit instructions from the Senate. But when he arrived there, he found a region called the Ciminian forest, which was utterly unknown and unexpected, and not in accord with the instructions that he had received. So he he abandoned his instructions and sent back his excuse to the Senate, which agreed that his departure was acceptable, even admirable, in the circumstances, faced with a new problem. So this is Machiavelli claiming that the ancients whom he departs from would have excused him because he faced a new danger that they didn't, namely a monotheistic religion, or a world of three monotheistic religions that totally changed the political aspects of society, made the polis really impossible, and introduced a kind of universalism to human life that it hadn't had before. So, and also had the twin defects of Christianity, namely that it makes people weak and that it makes them cruel. Weak, they don't want to fight, they just want to turn the other cheek. Cruel, they get so enthusiastic for and zealous for the religion that they try to impose it on others, as in the Crusades. So he knows that these future philosophers will possibly face a new Ciminian forest, something like, say, the problems of modern science,
right,
which Machiavelli didn't face or didn't or wasn't imminent in any way for him. Therefore, he, so to speak, gives his permission to future philosophers to change what he's done. But see, that's the question. How can he be sure that his principles will continue after he dies? And we see that, in fact, it's very hard to get rid of modernity once you have it.
Right.
So once you begin this with this elaborating and working, spending your life and your energy on the effectual truth and the benefits that come there from that, military there. Once military becomes technological, you're on a kind of moving belt that never stops.
Right.
The technology gets worse, gets more and more complicated, and you have to keep up. You have to keep up, otherwise you'll be defeated and you lose your freedom. So, and also besides the military, there's just a medicine.
I was thinking about that.
Yeah.
I mean, once that starts,
Yeah.
and once the relief of man's
Yeah.
estate and of the human,
Yeah,
we're all
right.
still bodies, and
Yes.
once the relief of
So,
that becomes possible,
today,
who's
we-
going to turn away from that, really? You know. I mean,
Yeah, it's true. Right today, everybody's questioning science, the climate change. Why is it changing? Because of science, because of technology, because of the internal combustion engine. And yet, science tells us about this, and now science has produced this vaccine to remedy. How can we give up those benefits that we live now to 90 years old? So.
And that's good. And I suppose Machiavelli might have expected that the criticisms, though deep and interesting, of modern science and the modern scientific view would all be ineffectual in the sense. I mean, understand.
Yes.
Even the critics themselves would understand that this is a reflection upon something and a deepening of our understanding of something. But who really calls for genuine abandonment?
There isn't even a name for
medicine or progress.
That's right.
You know.
The name for it is postmodern. See, they can't get away from it.
I guess so.
Yeah.
Or nostalgia.
You need a new name.
Yeah.
And a new start. Yeah. Machiavelli points out the importance of Christianity, and its the way in which it rules, by referring to dates. There are 26 dates in the discourses, and so when you know that's twice 13, there are plenty of 13. 13 seems to be Machiavelli's number. And all of the dates in the discourses are in Machiavelli's lifetime. So how do we count our years now? From the birth of Christ. Yeah. They've tried to change this a little. It's BCE instead of BC. Instead of, before Christ.
Yeah.
Or it's the A. They use, instead of the A, and CE doesn't stand for Christian era, it stands for common era. Yeah.
This was a concession to secularists and Jews and so forth.
Yeah, but it's that's just a cover up of the real truth, that we count all our years from the birth of Christ. Right. And Machiavelli suggests that possibly you could start from his birthday.
Since all the dates are in his lifetime.
Yeah, all the dates are in his life.
That hasn't quite happened.
Yeah,
all the
his birthday is May 3rd, 1469. So.
But the French Revolution tried that in the spirit. I mean, of course,
exactly.
People ridicule it now, but there was something behind that notion, right?
Yeah.
If you're really in a new start for mankind and rejecting the past. Machiavelli maybe thought you couldn't fully reject the past as much as the French Revolution, right?
Yeah,
you
probably
just destroy
Yes, the
existing.
Somehow the Senate, i.e. the the ancient philosophers remain.
Huh. And therefore,
Yeah. So, but there still remains a kind of dilemma for philosophy after Machiavelli, and that is, you have to, as a philosopher, you have to rethink something. As Machiavelli gives this definition, that said, it is good always to reason about things. It's always good. There's nothing you shouldn't reason about. So that means you have to reason about Machiavelli.
yeah.
You have to rethink Machiavelli. Was this a good thing? Should we make it permanent? Is modernity was modernity just an experiment? And we would go back to something else. We go back to the ancients.
Fourth.
Yeah.
Or third thing, I suppose, theory, conceivably.
Or something new.
Something new, yeah.
Yeah.
That would be the, right.
Yeah, so...
Post-human.
Right. So in a way, say, Machiavelli is a kind of tyrant over future philosophers because he forces them to begin from the same thing he begins from. And but in a way also he's just a prince over a republic because being philosophers, they get to rethink. So they're, in a way, rebellious subjects, at least potentially, not people who quietly and follow him.
Plus, in Machiavelli's world, presumably freedom of thought would be maybe more achievable or more accessible, more less difficult than than in the world he faced, right? So that he's not being hostile to philosophy, one might say, and
Right.
in creating this new world that respects reason and invites people to reason. It
He does.
It
So
doesn't burn you
that
at the
connects
stake.
him to the Enlightenment,
Yeah.
which is what Strauss does in his book. He says the Enlightenment really begins with Machiavelli. It's not just an 18th century event. That's just when the philosophes come out in public and try to claim authority on the basis of their philosophy.
So you have this,
Machiavelli doesn't think that's possible.
right.
People cannot be made into. Most people cannot be made into, which means states, princes cannot be made into philosophers.
People can't fundamentally change, maybe.
Yeah, they can't fundamentally change, and they can't fundamentally be enlightened either.
Yeah, so that
means
they should have read Machiavelli more in the Enlightenment, unless
yeah, that's right.
Shouldn't have just begun with
Everybody
Hobbes and Descartes or whatever.
Everybody who wants to think today should read Machiavelli much more than they do. Philosophy departments should start teaching him in their
That would be something.
fundamental courses.
Now Montesquieu, whom you
now we
devote
go to
such a long
Montesquieu
chapter
right.
to, really could be
I do have a
short
long
book.
chapter.
But it's but he appreciated. I mean, he was a philosopher who sort of an enlightenment. Whatever philosopher who appreciates.
I've talked about
Machiavelli.
him too in a previous
so we shouldn't
conversation. So we have to watch out.
That's okay.
Not to be too repetitious for eager listeners.
Yeah, but you hadn't really written up Montesquieu at that point, and you.
No, I hadn't.
You seem to have made new discoveries here. So.
There was a new discovery to be reported. That's right.
A new world.
But see, Montesquieu perhaps wanted to be the end of the line of Machiavellian philosophers, and he tried to change. He accepted the fundamental principle of effectual truth. And I remember I spoke before of that chapter in Book 29, Book 29, Chapter 19, in the way he treats so disrespectfully all these five philosophers, bringing out the passions which inspired them, not the reasons. So that's very bad. But he doesn't like the uno solo conclusion of Machiavelli. He thinks that's tyranny, and it needs to be corrected, and can be corrected. So, and what he corrects it with is our friend that we live with, liberal constitutionalism, and the separation of powers.
Right.
Yeah.
Power gets separated.
So
that's so important.
Yeah. And also the security of the individual, social security. That's phrase from
Right.
Montesquieu. It's all a matter of opinion, really. It's not just that you need to be made secure; you need to be made to feel you're secure. It's your opinion. You mustn't frighten people. Hobbes used government too punitively. So he tried to make fear the basis of equality. No, you mustn't do that. So you must, for one thing, separate the judiciary, which is the most fearful branch because it's what actually punishes people, sends you to jail, possibly even kills you, if it believes in capital punishment. So, and Montesquieu also had a certain appreciation for the ancients, which appears only in Machiavelli's in these sort of hidden images of communication. Let's call that esoteric communication. So, but Montesquieu tries to bring the ancients out into public. The principle of virtue, which is shown in the Republic of Virtue, the ancient Republic. The first 10 books of Montesquieu's Spirit of the Laws are on the ancient Republic. And that's really his treatment of Plato and Aristotle, what they do. Again, the virtual truth of their philosophy is in the kind of regimes that they advised and seemed to recommend, like Sparta, which is, I think, a considerable modification, not to say degeneration of those philosophers, but still there's some connection there. And he too seems to indicate that philosophy is something that is always open. And so still open, he wants to show that he's not simply rejected the ancients, as happened with most modern philosophers after Machiavelli,
Right.
and before Montesquieu. They laughed at them. Hobbes especially mocked the scholastic philosophers. They didn't even talk about actually. Aristotle too. He criticized Aristotle pretty fundamentally. But just with just single criticisms, he doesn't really meet their arguments.
So Montesquieu, though he seems to reject ultimately ancient virtue as a standard, he takes it seriously enough that one could then
he praises it very highly.
Invited to study it too, right? Which I think is a very different spirit, from Hobbes or even Locke,
It is.
or modern science, where it's all
It is.
disproved, or out of date,
It
or
is.
something.
There is something we've lost, a price that we've paid.
So Montesquieu tries to bring that back a little bit.
Does.
And
He does, and that's a certain nobility, generosity in his justice, which I think is a specialty of his.
And corrects Machiavelli according to his lights, and also the Enlightenment. Would that also be a criticism in the spirit of his criticism of Machiavelli, right? That you can't have this full bore Enlightenment, Voltairean Enlightenment or something.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
So he recommends a kind of rational religion or a reasoned religion and commerce thing. Commerce will calm people down. And just as we hope to do with communist China, you engage them. You give all commercial states reasons for not hating or at least not fighting each other. It ruins your trade.
But also make sure they're not ahead of us technologically in important military ways. Right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
combine that. As you say.
Yeah, that's perhaps not fully taken care of.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's so interesting about Montesquieu, who is too little studied maybe also and not taken philosophically enough, wouldn't you say?
Yes, once again.
Yeah.
Yes. Because it's a little bit hidden, you
Yeah.
have to dig for it. and you have to get yourself in the mood and with the equipment to dig.
And the sprawling book. Well,
Yeah.
they're different books.
And one thing, therefore, you need to do is pay a little bit of attention to numbers and the way in which philosophers indicate their attention through numbers. So esoteric writing has, I think, two aspects. That the use of numbers to indicate a problem, and then the use of images to elaborate a problem. Figurative images, you tell stories. You try to make the King of France, just to use this example, might be understood to be Thomas Aquinas, or even the god of scholastic theology, kind of constitutional God, with limited powers, is then limited by nature. And this is the way Machiavelli speaks of the King of France, and the others. I found it in Boccaccio too. France stands for the Sorbonne, the French of the philosophers of the Sorbonne, the scholastic philosophers. So that's an example of the figurative use of esoteric communication. The figurative use is more difficult, and people will have different views of whether this makes sense, whether it's reasonable to make that kind of. It's a guess. It really is a guess. It's a speculation. Better to say that than guess. It's i.e. a guess which has reason behind it, but not reason enough to close the deal and make it certain. And that's what a person does when he gives a hint. When you give a hint, it's something that you can deny. It's deniable. I didn't mean that. That wink I gave at you was just a blink in my eye. I had something. It's not, and you're just interpreting that. So you're asking, and are you the kind of person who can take a hint?
Right.
You say, so you have to be that kind of person. If you insist on complete proof of everything, then you'll have a very restricted life, and as a scholar, a very restricted mind.
Right.
Well, so let me give you an example of the numerical.
Let me ask one thing first on the
esoteric.
hints. I mean, it's reassuring, I assume, though, to find the same hint, as it were, or the same image, maybe, same use of someone metaphorically for someone else stands in more than one thinker, right? I mean, that would
Yes.
sort of reassure one that they saw each other's hints,
That's
and therefore
right.
that you're not making this up
Right.
out of whole cloth. If other people use political disputes to mask or to convey or to suggest philosophic disputes, and
Yeah.
if Alexander stands for Aristotle or whatever, and you
That's
can't
right.
be too formulaic about it, but
That's right.
yeah, and France is, and you say that other thinkers seem to have had this. This isn't.
Yes,
I
that's
mean,
do have the same practice.
so they're sort of signaling each other across the.
They
ages
are
a
signaling
little bit.
exactly across virtue signaling across
Yeah, right.
across
Philosophy
the
signaling.
centuries.
that's
Yeah,
good.
philosophers. I mean, yeah, that's what they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the numbers you see don't have to be interpreted so much. I mean, that can tell you for sure that something is up. Like those 26 dates in the discourses, like the 142 chapters of the discourses that happen to be, this is what Strauss points out, the same number of books as in Livy's history.
Right.
That's not an accident.
Right.
And yet the meaning of it is not clear. So it's a puzzle.
What's knowable, presumably, is that it's not an accident, or it seems
Exactly.
virtually,
That's right.
almost certainly knowable.
Yeah.
The meaning,
So
obviously, that's a
that's
puzzle.
why the numbers help.
Yeah.
So that when they tell you that there's something there to be understood that you're perhaps not quite getting. So what I saw in Montesquieu, the continuation chapters, as I call them, Montesquieu's Spirit of the Law says 31 books, and those are divided into 6 parts. And then he speaks at the beginning of the design of the author and the design of the work. 2 designs. So he tells you that the design of the work matters. So the official design, you can see,
I see.
6 parts, 31 books, and each book has a certain number of chapters. One book has just 1 chapter. That's the 27th. The 26th book, you can guess, might be quite a bit about Machiavelli, but it has only 25 chapters.
Ah,
So the 27th book would have been the 26th book, 26th chapter in the 26th book. But Montesquieu said, oh, well,
separates himself.
yeah, separate.
Yeah.
Make it a little bit more difficult. But you can see he's sort of playing with this narrative. But the number of chapters, see, that people don't count, because there doesn't seem to be any reason to do so. You're not required to do so. But my friend Diana Schaub did it, and she found 605 chapters. And she noticed, and
It's just adding up the chapters in all the books. It's
all
not some
the
mystical
chapters
thing,
of all
right?
the books. Yeah, it's not
right.
it's not a yeah.
I mean, it's not like
it's
a
little
her
bit,
own chapter.
No, it's slightly laborious, but and it's easy to make mistakes. It's a test of your accounting skills,
Right.
arithmetical abilities. So, but why would you do it? When it comes to 605, and then there are these continuation chapters, and this is an obvious puzzle, that Montesquieu has chapters most of the chapters have subjects, but now and again you come across a chapter which says continuation of the same subject, continuation du même sujet. Why?
And it's not
Why
only
not?
when the previous chapters are
Right.
too long or something
No.
like that. Sometimes they're quite
Right.
short, as I recall.
Yes, very short chapter can then
And then
have
there's a continuation.
Still has a continuation. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, hey, what's going on? What's going on here? But there's a number 2. There is a number of continuation chapters, which Diana Schaub counted as well, and that's 55. And then now let's look at those 2 numbers, 605 and 55. 605 is 5 times 11 times 11, and 55 is 1/11 of 605. So that's 550 chapters that have a subject, and 605 chapters in all. So the chapters that have a subject are different is a different number from those that from all the chapters. So you got, and that's 5 times 10. 550 is 5 times 10 times 11.
Right.
So there's something going on with 10 and 11, which I would just suggest, and people can follow this up, has something to do with Christianity. And 5. 5 stands for the senses we have. The 5 senses, you touch,
Right.
and then 4 senses on the face, taste, hearing, smell, and sight. So this is
And
what
was famously 5 senses.
5
Way
senses.
back then. It wasn't.
Way back when.
We're not inventing this.
This is not
Yeah.
not a new discovery or a new designation.
Right.
We have 5 senses, and then some people speak of a 6th sense.
Right.
Yeah, so everyone knows there are 5 senses. Not everyone could list them as I just did, but
That's impressive.
there you go.
Yeah, that was Donald Trump-like in its ability to
Yeah.
come and do that.
So in other words, philosophy has to do with Christianity and it has to do with empirical senses.
Oh.
And then this is the beginning. And I think more generally, or in addition, each of the continuation chapters has something of what the philosopher is commenting on to other philosophers, especially.
So they're special chapters.
There are
in a
special
way,
chapters.
More.
Yes, these are special chapters that do comment on the preceding chapter, but sort of from a philosopher's point of view.
Or take it further.
Yeah, and so two of them are about ostracism, the 33rd and the 44th. See, he likes these, sticks with the 11s.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, have to do with ostracism, which was a practice in the ancient polis of exiling or getting rid of anyone who was outstanding in such a way as to pose a danger to the rest of the city. So, in a way, this was, and Aristotle discusses this at some length. So the justice of it and the injustice, it seems unjust to kick out your best citizen,
Right.
and as a threat. Why not let him take over the government? Well, but that's a risk especially to democracy. He might be tyrant, and good as he is, or just because he's so good, he'll govern and not listen to us. So there's a kind of democratic justice in ostracism, and also an injustice in getting rid of, not paying attention to the best citizen, who might be the philosopher. So Montesquieu says ostracism is actually glory. It isn't just something you should endure if you're the best citizen. You should take glory in being ostracized, because it's a noble sacrifice for the good of the city and in general of mankind, not to try to rule as a philosopher. And so he backs off from. Machiavelli spoke of the glory of governing, and Montesquieu has the glory of not governing. It isn't quite that difference isn't quite so clear, because Machiavelli also claimed to be allowing glory to the princes that he instructs. They get to, and in a way, they get the political glory, which he modestly refuses in his own name, at least so far as most people understand him. So this is Montesquieu speaking of the glory of philosopher. And then last point, the 55th continuation chapter is the last chapter in the book. So the book ends not with a subject, but with a continuation of the subject. And that has to do with feudalism, because the last two books of the Spirit of the Laws are about feudal right and the origin of it, and the Frankish kings in France. But I think at the end of the book, Montesquieu indicates it's very complicated and it's very difficult to understand. By the way, David Hume wrote Montesquieu a letter in which he says, can you tell me what you are saying in the last chapter of the Spirit of the Laws, because I don't understand it. And Montesquieu wrote a very, very polite letter in reply, not answering the question. So, but I think he understands the situation of philosophers versus the rest of mankind differently from Machiavelli. It shouldn't be either an army or a church, but it should be feudal, as if philosopher has his own followers. And there are plural, many feudal lords, philosophers with their followers. And the duty of a follower is to come to the defense of the Lord when he calls upon you. But otherwise, it's a way of sharing rule.
Yeah.
And many philosophers rather than just one. So, and in his book, Montesquieu refers to many, many philosophers. I mean, and the footnotes, I didn't count them, though I know somebody who has.
Oh,
but
yeah.
yeah, but he wants to induce peoples, democratic peoples, or free republics, or monarchies. He wants to release them from the subjection to a single philosopher. He doesn't want to take over that task himself. There is one thing he did, though. He never mentions John Locke in his book. It's one philosopher he doesn't mention. The one who's closest to him, the one who also is the founder of liberal constitutionalism, and who also referred to the Constitution of England as the model regime for free peoples. But it seems that Montesquieu, who treats the Constitution of England twice in the spirit of the laws, wanted it to be less formally understood than according to Locke's principles. You have to look at the passions and the parties that arise in a free country. It isn't enough simply to refer to the three branches of government. You have to look at how they operate.
And in reality.
In reality. So I think his treatment of the English Constitution is done in such a way as to take over, hijack it from Locke.
So we end up with some of both, I think, maybe in America.
Yeah.
Right? Bill of Rights, which is Lockean, one might say, in spirit. But
and the state of nature.
Complication.
Yeah, we have the state of nature, that's in Locke. That's really pretty much
not in Montesquieu.
He refers to it at the beginning of his book, but he kicks it out of his liberal constitution.
So that's interesting. So he thinks a Montesquieuian attitude towards liberal constitutionalism might be a little healthier than a Lockean one, or at least has to coexist with it, I suppose.
Instead of people being afraid in the state of nature, or acquisitive, they're timid. That's what he says.
Secure,
They would be. They're interested in security.
Yeah.
The state of nature is the state of insecurity. So let's not talk about that.
But he does though he doesn't care as much as Machiavelli, perhaps, to have glory alone. He does the justly celebrated Montesquieu and not the Federalist. And he was extremely well known at that time as a founder, but not the founder, perhaps, or an expositor of constitutional government and separation of powers and so forth. Yeah, but he doesn't.
And the security is the security of the individual. So there's this democratic aspect, which we like, of course.
And is the continuation thing, so that itself is that in previous works that one thinks about?
Yeah, well, that's a question.
Someone watching needs to go look that up.
Right.
And it doesn't occur to me offhand, though, that Hobbes or others or chapter.
I don't know whether
have chapter titles like that. I don't know enough of these works. Yeah.
But maybe there's many obvious examples. There could be.
Yeah. So when we discussed this at dinner last night briefly, you explained this, and I looked up. It occurred to me, and this has occurred to you, of course, since you know Tocqueville better than I do, and this excellent translation of Tocqueville here, the Dictionary. So he uses once.
Yes.
Somewhat mysterious when you think about it for a second, quite bizarrely, at the end of Democracy in America, Chapter 7 of Part 4 of Volume 2. Continuation of the preceding chapters. He seems to have been able to give every chapter before this a title, often quite punchy, and
suddenly he loses his imagination.
And then Chapter 8, the final, is general view of the subject. And when you do look at those two, which therefore he really sets apart, you might say, they are. It feels
Yeah.
They're more personal and also somewhat more philosophic, I would say, than
Yeah, a good deal more philosophical.
goes
He steps
before.
into the office of God, and he tries to understand both democracy and aristocracy, as God does, which most humans don't. We lesser beings are either democratic or aristocratic, and we don't know how to combine them or to appreciate both. So that, and of course, Tocqueville was a great student and admirer
Montesquieu.
of fellow Frenchman
Right.
Montesquieu,
So maybe we'll have to come
fellow
back.
aristocrat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll discuss that particular continuation chapter. Because I was just looking at it briefly, and
Yeah.
it is full of, well, as you know, it's full of material. But
Well,
yes, that
I-
very high ending with yes, but you don't. One doesn't think he almost doesn't talk about something like that. And it's
Yeah.
one can't have the perspective of God. It's almost
It
impious
is.
to try, but then he sort of
Yeah.
gives it to you in a way. Whereas
That's
previously
right.
he's separated. This is aristocracy and this is democracy, and
Yeah.
you can't look at both at once, as it were. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right.
Maybe we should discuss chapter 7.
That would be a continuation conversation.
Yes, okay, good. It's a good note to end on. Yeah, we will continue this conversation. Harvey, thank you very much for this really fascinating discussion of Machiavelli, but
Thanks.
modernity, really, and really what it means, because so those of us who've vaguely are Straussians of one kind or another, and others too now talk of, well, so everyone talks of modernity, but we talk of Machiavelli as a founder of modernity, but I think you've really, in both of what you've written, and I think hope in this conversation for people, helped explain what that means, the magnitude, the amazingness of it, really.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it is. It is.
Anyway, thank you for taking the time today,
Yeah.
and thank you for joining us on Conversations.